Hello folks, Scott with Dallas Paint Correction and Auto Detailing here in Dallas, Texas. I want to talk about something that's really important. I want to talk about something that many of you probably have never heard. I got a feeling you're going to hear it here first. Well, since we're going to talk about engine bay cleaning, we're going to talk about whether or not modern day alternators today can get wet during the process of cleaning them. Well, for many years it really hasn't been an issue. Some guys would cover the alternator with a plastic bag. They were more worried about fluid or any type of cleaner getting inside the alternator, gunking up the brushes around the rotor of the alternator and causing failure. That's fine, that's cool. People have been doing that for a long time. There is a problem, and this is why I have it. I have a 2016 Chevy Silverado. I'm going to be doing an engine bay detailing for my customer. I want to talk about something that not a lot of people know about. In fact, I'm willing to say most don't know about it in auto detailing. But since the early 2000s or the mid 2000s, I've been getting calls from professional detailers throughout the country about a certain particular problem. I will make a small little statement right now. I'm incredibly grateful for not only being able to understand auto detailing, been doing it for a long time, but I have connections within the automotive industry that go pretty deep, from paint, auto body, general repair, transmission stuff, and it's just, my avenue of information is just, it's amazing, and I'm grateful for it. When we're cleaning an alternator or we're cleaning an engine bay and we've got the alternator to be concerned about, since the early 2000s, the mid 2000s, and it is now not getting worse, but these issues are going to become more and more relevant, prevalent within engine bay detailing. What I have in my hand here is a pulley to an alternator. This pulley is unlike any alternator pulley you probably have ever seen. They're putting these on new cars these days. In fact, they're going to start putting these on most new cars that are being made. This is what they call is a clutch pulley. This is not a standard V pulley or serpentine pulley that goes on the front of the alternator and it's locked on with the nut. This is called a clutch pulley. It's a decoupler pulley. In fact, if I held the middle spline, there's a spline that runs through this pulley. If I held that spline so it could not turn, this clutch pulley will turn in one direction freely. And then if I try to turn the other way, it locks. Well, why are they putting these alternators on cars? I'm going to tell you why. Alternators today, or I should say cars, as consumers, we want more and more technology. We want more gadgets in our cars, TV screens, navigation screens, chairs, seats that vibrate, massage us, give us heat, give us air conditioning in the summertime. The amount of amperage that is required for all these fancy gadgets on cars is going through the roof. Alternators today are getting close to 200 amps. 200 amps seems to be anywhere from 180 to 200 amps seems to be the norm. That was not the case back in the early 90s or even the 80s. Most cars in the early 90s or mid 90s, it was about 120 amps was about as high as the amperage has gone. It's now going incredibly high. We have to remember something. Why are they putting these fancy clutch pulleys on the front of alternators, and what does it have to do with engine bay cleaning? I'm going to get to it. When we look at the alternator itself, for every 23 to 25 amps an alternator produces, it has the ability to pull 1 horsepower away from the engine. It needs 1 horsepower to be able to generate 23 to 25 amps of power for the vehicle. Now we've got alternators that have the ability to get up to 200 amps, some of them even higher. That potentially means that they can pull 8 horsepower away from the engine. If you kind of think about this in your brain, there is a tremendous amount of pressure on that belt, on that pulley that's attached to the alternator. And when you've got an alternator that's producing 200 amps, it's a tremendous amount of tension on the actual belt itself. A lot of you guys may know and remember, like an old Dodge Cummins pickup truck or an old Ford diesel pickup truck. A lot of times when you used to turn those engines off, you would hear the belt squeal when you turn the engine off. Well, car manufacturers today need to release that pressure that is created on the actual belt itself because alternators are going so incredibly high in amperage. They came up with the clutch pulley. What this pulley allows the alternator to do is when you turn the engine off, yes, the belt stops, but because this has the ability to free rotate, The rotor that's attached to this on the alternator can free spin for about a second or two after you initially turn the engine off. That stops the belt from chirping or squealing when you turn the engine off. I don't want to use the word abruptly, but if you turn the engine off and if you've got an alternator that's producing 150 amps at that moment, that's a tremendous amount of pressure and the belt could squeal. Car manufacturers need to get that tension away from the engine, so they came up with the clutch pulley for the front of the alternator. Now, when it comes to cleaning alternators or engine bays today, we have to realize something. I'm going to show you a failed clutch pulley. You'll notice the bearings in the back of this clutch pulley are completely exposed. The seal has broken off. We got the bearings that are just, this thing is completely shot. This is a bad clutch pulley. If you notice the new type of clutch pulley, it has a seal that is on the bearing. This old clutch pulley used to have a seal on the bearing. Why is this important when it comes to engine bay detailing? Well, these seals like to pop out. The life expectancy of a clutch pulley on the front of a modern day alternator today is about 80,000 to 100,000 miles. They eventually go bad. But the seals can actually pop off prematurely before the 80,000 or the 100,000 mile breakdown point for these things. And what are we using when we're cleaning engines? We're using a degreaser. We're using free-flowing water. The water really isn't the issue here. It's the degreaser. If the seal behind the clutch pulley has broken and released and fallen off the front of the alternator, and you're cleaning around the engine bay and you get degreaser inside this bearing, you are indirectly making the bearing go prematurely fail a little bit faster. Hopefully that kind of makes sense to most of you. That's basically one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about when we're using a degreaser in modern day engines. These clutch pulleys are subject. The little seal behind the bearing, or the seal that's in the bearing, is also subject to breaking down from some heavy cleaners, so we want to be careful about these clutch pulleys even if the seal is intact. The other issue here too is most of these pulleys will fail around 80,000 miles, 100,000 miles, and guess what? Most customers, if you're a professional detailer, that tends to be a time where people look at their engine compartment and go, holy crap, it's dirty, I want to have it serviced, I want to have it cleaned. These pulleys are going to fail on their own anyway. They're not meant to last forever. The reason I bring up this point is because if you come in around the time period that this clutch pulley is about to fail, this is about liability for professional detailers. If this clutch pulley has begun to fail, yet the customer isn't aware of it, you're not aware of it, you may be innocently cleaning this engine, degreasing it, drying it off, putting a dressing on it, and about a week later, this pulley's going to go bad. Completely indirectly from, not because you did anything wrong, but guess what happens in the world of liability? The customer's going to start hearing this thing a week later after you did the engine bay, and they're going to blame you for cleaning the engine because you're the last one who touched the vehicle. It is really important to understand how these clutch pulleys work, their life expectancy. When I do an engine bay detail on a new modern car, this alternator is right below this cover right here. You can actually see it if we put the camera to the side. There are some telltale signs when these things start to go bad. One, you can hear them, but before you can begin to hear them, when they're mounted to the front of the alternator, if you can see the alternator, and the reason I bring this up is because a lot of modern day engines, most of the alternators are buried underneath the engine or deep on the side, not really an issue for us. But Chevy, Dodge, Chrysler, Ford, most of their alternators are towards the top of the engine where we're going to be spraying our degreaser. It is important, if you can see the alternator, to evaluate it. And where I'm going to tell you where you need to look is the front of the alternator, the front housing, where the pulley is up against the housing. When these pulleys start to go bad, you'll start to see metal shavings that stick to the front of the housing that the alternator is applied to. You'll start to see some little metal shavings. You'll also start to see some brown dust that's on the front of the alternator housing. Before I begin any engine bay detail for somebody, especially in these days, if I can see the alternator, I'm looking for that. I'm also looking at the mileage on the vehicle, looking to see if it has a clutch pulley. Again, not all cars have them, but we're getting to the point where they're going to start becoming more and more prevalent. They're going to be on just about every car going in the future here. So I will look at that front housing. If I see any brown dust that looks like clutch dust or any metal filings, I will bring it to my customer's attention immediately before I start washing the vehicle, because the last thing I want to do is detail the engine and then a week later they blame me for the pulley going bad. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. So this is about liability, understanding what you're actually doing under the hood so you're protecting your fanny throughout this process. So that's what I wanted to explain to you guys about clutch pulleys on alternators. It is really important perhaps to cover them up completely. Do not get any degreaser if the seal has begun to fail, or if the seal hasn't failed. These little seals here are subject to some pretty heavy cleaners. They can begin to break them down. Identify and look at the front of the alternator before you begin an engine bay process. See if you see any metal shavings, brown clutch dust on the front. Bring it up to your customer. Doesn't mean you can't wash the engine. It just means that you've protected your fanny, and let your customer know your clutch pulley may be going bad, because I've had some professional detailers tell me their butt was in the sling. It's not that these pulleys are expensive. They're not. Sometimes you can buy these through alternator shops and aftermarket suppliers for $40 or $50. But when your customer is told that this pulley is bad from the dealer is going to replace the whole alternator as one component, when in fact it was just this that went bad. And you as a professional detailer could be looking at hundreds of dollars of a repair that was never your fault to begin with, but it was because you didn't understand the pulley. You didn't have the knowledge to protect yourself. When I do an engine bay detail, I also check to see, is the engine light on, the check engine light on? I talk to my customer beforehand. I want them to verbally tell me, no, there's no check engine light. I will also, in front of the customer, before I begin to do the detail, I will turn the car on and start it over, and I will verify there's no check engine light. So this way, because this is a weird world, a check engine light could have always been on, but because you clean the engine, now they want to blame you for that light being on, and you may be, you know, in liability with wanting to fix certain things that they neglected for a long time. This is about being smart. This is about being smart in business. So there is my tutorial on clutch pulleys. Be careful when you're washing modern day engines today. The front of this pulley, here's the new pulley, right? They also have a cover. This would be mounted on the alternator. They have a debris cover, an inspection port that typically is on the front of these alternators or on the front of the pulleys. This stops debris from getting inside the clutch mechanism. Mechanics today are doing something very interesting because they know these pulleys can go bad, and one of the things they're doing is poking a screwdriver in the middle of this rubber seal, pulling off the rubber seal to check to see if they see metal shavings, clutch dust inside here, to verify whether or not this was a problem. But you want to know something? The mechanic never puts these back on. That if you're coming to clean the engine on the vehicle and this port is now been released and removed, you got to be careful about getting any type of degreaser inside this pulley. Sometimes those seals will not be on the bearing, and you're spraying degreaser directly in there, prematurely making the bearing go bad faster. But there's my tutorial on clutch pulleys. You probably will not hear that on any other auto detailing channel because not a lot of people understand how these things work. Again, they're trying to release the pressure that's generated on the belt for about every 23 to 25 amps that's generated by the alternator. If these clutch pulleys were not on there, you would all be turning your engine off and the belt would squeal on engine shut off. They need to release that pressure. They don't want that pressure to transfer to the power steering pump, the air conditioner compressor. They release it by using a free spinning clutch pulley that turns in one direction freely and locks in the other. Thank you so much, guys. Just protect yourself when it comes to engine bay detailing. Again, those pulleys start to go bad about 80 to 100,000 miles. It may be you innocently cleaning an engine, detailing it, making it look great, and then a week later your customer is blaming you for his alternator or the pulley going bad. That's just not true, but you got to be careful. And again, these seals can fall off well before the 80,000 mile mark or the 100,000 mile mark when these things typically go bad. If the seal is not there, it's important we're not getting degreaser inside these bearings. Indirectly, it would be an innocent thing to do, right? But now we understand the knowledge behind this. Cover up the front of these modern day alternators. Check the front of the alternator. Do you see metal shavings, clutch dust in the front? If you do, make sure you tell your customer about it. They need to get a new clutch pulley put on their car. Tell them if you clean the engine and all of a sudden this thing goes bad, it's not your fault. But if you didn't know that information, you may be buying your customer a new alternator. Appreciate it, guys. Love you all. Take care.